Hello, my name is Brian Crowley, and I'm honoured to be asked by Clare Libraries to record my talk on Daniel O'Connell's experience in prison in 1844, particularly this year, this year marks the 250th anniversary of his birth in 1775. So I am just going to share my screen now. Here we go. So my talk today is entitled "The Liberator in Chains: Daniel O'Connell in Richmond Bridewell Penitentiary, 1844." My name is Brian Crowley. As I said, I'm a curator with the Office of Public Works, and I've worked for many years on the collection in Derrynane, the ancestral home of Daniel O'Connell and his family. But I'm based most of the time in Kilmainham Gaol, so this subject kind of combines two of my big interests in terms of Daniel O'Connell and also the history of imprisonment and particularly political imprisonment in Ireland. Uh, I've also kind of decided to look at this subject largely through the lens of material culture, the objects, the things associated with this event, and I suppose look using them as a way to get an insight into this remarkable period in Daniel O'Connell's life. So, I suppose just to start to look at maybe why Daniel O'Connell ends up in Richmond Bridewell in 1844. We need to go back a year to 1843 to what becomes known as the Year of Repeal. So this was a year where O'Connell and his movement begin this amazing series of monster meetings to agitate for the repeal of the Act of Union, for the restoration of the Irish Parliament in College Green, and for Ireland effectively to have what I suppose we'd now refer to as home rule. And of course, this would be a very different kind of Irish Parliament than the one that was abolished in 1800. This would have been an Irish Parliament in which Irish Catholics could not only vote but also could sit in the Parliament. Um, what's really interesting, I think, looking at the Year of Repeal is the way that O'Connell uses material culture, uses the power and the symbolism of objects, but also places. So in many cases, he deliberately chooses locations that have some kind of historical resonance. Most obviously, we have the Hill of Tara, the ancient seat of the High Kings of Ireland. Uh, but these monster meetings happened all over the country, and thousands, and in, depending on who you read, some reporters would say millions of people turned out to hear O'Connell speak and to agitate. And I think what O'Connell is doing here is actually creating a physical manifestation of the will of the Irish people to have self-government once again. So if we go on to the next slide. Um, Now, I suppose the symbolism of these locations was not lost on the British administration in Ireland and indeed O'Connell's many enemies, particularly his enemies in the conservative press in London. And of course, the resonance of Tara was something that they were very much aware of, thanks to Moore's melodies, to Thomas Moore's melodies, his melody, "The Harp That Once True Tara's Hall," was sung in drawing rooms across not just Ireland but also Great Britain. So they knew exactly the symbolism of O'Connell going to this royal seat. And many of his enemies suggested that what he was trying to do was not secure a parliament for Ireland, but actually he was on a campaign to make himself the King of Ireland. And you can see this is an anti-O'Connell cartoon from the time where they parody him and present him almost as this kind of court jester who has declared himself king in the ancient hill of Tara. And in I suppose it should also be acknowledged that O'Connell, particularly through material culture, in some ways is, I suppose, playing with this idea. On the 1st of October in 1843, in Mullaghmast, which again was a historic site, which had a kind of resonance with kind of Renaissance Ireland. He was presented with what is referred to sometimes as O'Connell's cap, or the Milesian cap, or the O'Connell crown. And this is definitely something that worried the authorities quite a lot. Was this cap a symbol of office, or a symbol of respect, or a symbol of O'Connell's leadership, or was it in fact a symbol of his aspirations to become King of Ireland? And as I said, I think O'Connell and his movement are kind of quite ambiguous about that at times. I think not because I don't think O'Connell had any kind of serious ambitions to become King of Ireland, but I think he also knew that the power of maybe playing with the symbolism of this could have. And this cap will appear again and again throughout our talk. It's something that O'Connell remained very attached to. It's now in the National Museum of Ireland. And again, interestingly, this illustration from the London Illustrated News was from O'Connell's trial in 1844, and it was used in evidence against him to suggest that he was conspiring against the crown. And again, in terms of that ambiguity in Derrynane, we have a ceremonial trowel, which O'Connell used to lay the foundation stone of St. James's Church on James's Street in Dublin. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's right beside Guinness Brewery. And at the entrance, on one side of the entrance, we have O'Connell as a medieval Irish king. And again, is it a crown or is it a cap? I think, again, another manifestation of this kind of playfulness, ambiguity that this hat creates. And again, I think O'Connell is very anxious to do this. Also, I think O'Connell is very anxious um, to draw on Irish history, and I suppose draw on the glories of Irish history, because I suppose we must remember that in the 1840s, he's dealing with a country which, over the previous centuries, has experienced a huge degree of, I suppose, cultural devastation. Um, so much of Irish culture has been lost, has been destroyed in the turbulent years of the kind of 16th, 17th, 18th century. And O'Connell is anxious to show the world, and also to show Irish people themselves, that they have a rich and sophisticated and complex culture, um, because many of those, particularly in the Tory press in London, often portrayed Ireland as this kind of lawless, reckless, cultureless place full of poverty-stricken people who are too backward uh, to develop and create their own civilization. That in fact Ireland is uh, in many texts at the time is portrayed as kind of this kind of blank canvas in need of civilization. And what O'Connell is constantly trying to emphasize is the fact that Ireland is this rich and sophisticated country, and he will often play up indeed his own long lineage as the O'Connell of Derrynane, the leader of the O'Connell clan, that he himself has an ancient aristocratic lineage. The year of repeal, the monster meetings come to a dramatic halt when the meeting planned for Clontarf, of course, the scene of the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, another resonant moment in Irish history. It is banned by the British authorities, and O'Connell then is faced with a choice. He can go ahead with the meeting, or he can cancel it. And O'Connell decides to cancel Clontarf, because I think he's very conscious of the fact that, his people, they're not armed, they're not trained, they have no means of offering resistance. And I think he feels a huge degree of responsibility, and he doesn't want violence or any loss of life to occur. And I think he takes quite a courageous step to ban the meeting for the good of his followers, because I think he knows if the meeting went ahead, that there would be violence, and the people who would bear the brunt of that violence, it could well have been a massacre, and the people who would bear that violence would be his supporters. So he cancels this meeting on the 8th of October, and in many ways that brings an end to the year of repeal. Yet, despite this, he and many of his followers are charged with conspiracy against the crown, and they go to trial in the Four Courts on the 15th of January, and the trial takes place between the 15th of January and the 12th of February, 1844. And we can see here some contemporary images of that trial. O'Connell is not the only person on trial. There are at least two priests, Father Thomas Tierney and Father James Tyrrell, but also a number of men involved in his movement, as well as a number of newspaper editors. So you can see here John O'Connell, his son, who's kind of his right-hand man in the movement. Uh, Charles Gavin Duffy, who's the editor of The Nation, Richard Barrett, who's the editor of The Pilot is very much the in-house newspaper of the O'Connell movement. Uh, O'Connell himself, John Gray, who's the editor of the Freeman's Journal, T.M. Ray, who is the secretary of the Repeal Association, and a figure again that we'll be hearing an awful lot about. He's very much kind of, I suppose, the unofficial archivist of the movement as well as Thomas Steele, who again is a key, I suppose, ally and supporter of O'Connell in the repeal movement. Uh, Eventually, one of the priests dies. One of the others, the charges are dropped. So eventually, it's O'Connell and the other six, and they become known as the Traversers, are on trial. And here you see O'Connell, as he had done throughout his career, he uses his trial as an opportunity to flex his oratorical skills, and highlight just, I think, the degree to which the justice system is being abused and the law is being abused for political ends, as this kind of, I suppose, what we might now describe as something of a stitch up is created, in which himself and his followers are charged on charges of conspiracy, and eventually found guilty. And as I said, even at the time, lots of people are complaining and are kind of outraged by the abuse of the legal system, by the government and the British administration in Ireland at the time. So in anticipation of the announcement of the verdict, and I think it's very clear to everybody that it's going to be a guilty verdict. A proclamation is issued. This is a copy from Derrynane. This is issued on the 11th of February, the day before, just saying no riot, no tumult, no blow, no violence. So O'Connell again wants to keep his movement violence free. Again, I think he's aware of the fact that the victims of uh, a crackdown on his followers would be the most, I suppose, the most vulnerable, the weakest among them, were the ones who would probably suffer the most. So that's exactly what happens. They're found guilty, and then there's this kind of weird, I suppose, hiatus or gap between the passing of of the sentence and then the actual sentencing. So he's found guilty, but sentence itself, the nature of the sentence or the punishment, won't be announced until May. So he uses this opportunity then these weeks that follow again for propaganda purposes. So he goes to London, and there are a series of I suppose set piece propaganda events organized. So you can see here, this is this grand banquet in Covent Garden in the theatre. So many people want to attend that they actually take over the whole theatre for this banquet on the 12th of March, 1844 in London. And then on St. Patrick's Day, he's invested into the Holy Order of the Guild of St. Joseph and Mary in the Virginia Street Chapel on Radcliffe Highway in London. So this is I suppose, this religious order. But again, it's really interesting how O'Connell and his movement are using material culture in terms of promoting their cause. So this illustration comes from the Illustrated London News, and it's always, when you look at it now, he's almost like a knight going into battle. He's invested into this almost chivalric order. They place a cloak, this green velvet cloak, around his shoulders, and this is the hat that is placed on his head as a member of this guild. And again, huge propaganda value is gained by this. And again, I suppose what O'Connell is using this, I suppose, this tour of England to do is to highlight, I suppose, the injustice and the corruption really within the administration of government in Ireland by Westminster. The other thing to say as well is, in terms of, the prospect of O'Connell going to prison, is the repeal movement. As I said, they're at this stage they're a very sophisticated movement. They have a very good sense of spectacle and how to create publicity. And they're also, this isn't their first time using imprisonment for political ends. So in the 1830s, one of the things that O'Connell and his movement are very much involved is the campaign against tithes, which was essentially a tax paid by farmers, and this money would go to support the established church, the Anglican Church of Ireland. Um, and in the 1830s, this became, there was a huge focus on this. This is the period of what was referred to as the Tithe War. And there were a number of men who refused to pay their tithes. And because they refused to pay their tithes, refused to pay what would have been considered by the government a debt, they were placed into debtors' prison, into the Four Courts Marshalsea in Dublin. And interestingly, a number of them died, including this man, Thomas Tyquin, was from Shinrone, in what was then Kings County, now Offaly. And when he died in May 1837, there was a very elaborate, I suppose, funeral procession back to Shinrone, organised by the repeal movement. So the newspapers at the time described how his body left in a hearse from the Four Courts Marshalsea, from the National Debtors Prison, which was just off Thomas Street in Dublin. And then it proceeded out towards the Naas Road and was accompanied on its way home to Shinrone by almost like a relay of priests and clergy. And when it got to towns along the way, like Naas and Newbridge, the uh, the local clergy would come out and bless the coffin, and prayers would be said. And this went on for, like, obviously at the time, traveling by horse back to Offaly from Dublin. This took days, and again was a way of generating support and sympathy for this political movement. So the repeal movement, as I said, are not unfamiliar with how to use imprisonment to their advantage. Um, and, many of the things that they use to describe, they describe Thomas Tyquin as being, a martyr in prison, and described him as being, held in a dungeon in Dublin. This language is used again with O'Connell. So the sentencing, as I said, takes place many months actually after sentence has been passed. It doesn't happen until the 30th of May, 1844, in the Four Courts. And there's a lot of speculation leading up to this about where O'Connell will end up. Um, the Newry Telegraph, which was a very unionist, anti-O'Connellite newspaper from Newry in County Armagh, they were kind of cock a hoop really at the prospect that O'Connell was going to end up in prison, and they hoped that he would end up in Kilmainham Jail. Kilmainham Jail at that point was the county jail for Dublin, next door to the county courthouse, which was also the headquarters of the Grand Jury of Dublin, which is essentially like I suppose it was the nearest thing to the local authority at the time. But the Grand Jury was made up largely by wealthy Protestant landowners. And O'Connell had had a very fractious relationship in 1820, in December of 1820. He'd actually been forced out of a meeting of the freeholders of County Dublin, were meeting in Dublin in Kilmainham Courthouse at bayonet point. Himself and his followers, they reassembled the meeting apparently outside a house opposite the courthouse. Um, the Newry Telegraph, as I said, they were hoping that he would end up there on the cold stone floors of Kilmainham, and that they thought that a few months in Kilmainham would put an end to O'Connell's campaign for the repeal of the Act of Union. However, it wasn't to be. When O'Connell left the Four Courts, he went down the South Circular Road, past Kilmainham Jail and Courthouse, uh, but he went along the South Circular to Richmond Bridewell Penitentiary. This was one of two penitentiaries in Dublin City. This was the city jail for men. In the mid 1830s, there had been a reorganization of prisons in Dublin. So Richmond Bridewell on the South Circular Road, which had been built in the 1810s, it was designated as the male prison, and Grange Gorman Female Penitentiary on the north side became the first uh, female-only prison in Great Britain or Ireland. Crucially, Richmond Bridewell Penitentiary, as I said, it was the city jail, the Dublin City Jail for men, and therefore it was under the control of Dublin Corporation. In 1841, the Lord Mayor of Dublin was Daniel O'Connell. Daniel O'Connell had become Lord Mayor uh, by, I suppose, challenging again the kind of the corruption and the vested interests, which up until then had meant that Dublin Corporation largely served the interests of kind of uh, the Dublin Protestant Unionist elite, and himself and his followers had gone through those eligible to vote and had made the voter list somewhat more democratic, and certainly somewhat more representative of the population in Dublin at the time, resulting in him being elected as Mayor of Dublin. So as a result, in 1844, his followers were largely in control of Dublin Corporation, and they were running the prison. So they were, let's just say, very amenable to making sure that Daniel O'Connell was and his followers, the six other men, were very comfortable while they were in the city's jail. So again, for those of you who might be familiar with Dublin, this is a photograph of what was Richmond Bridewell. It later became Wellington Barracks. After independence, it became Griffith Barracks, and it's now Griffith College, a third level institution. And you can see it here. The original 18th, sorry, early 19th century jail from the 1910s is was built around a series of four courtyards with a kind of central spine in the middle. Um, at the edge there, you can see the addition of a radial blocks of prison cells. These were added in the 1830s. The original jail actually was designed by Francis Johnston, who's probably most famous as the architect responsible for the General Post Office. But as you can see, this is a plan of the prison from the 1860s, but it's very similar, I imagine, to how it was back then. You can see there Eve, which is the entrance from the South Circular Road. You can see the boundary wall at the other end, and behind that would have been the Grand Canal. In terms of Daniel O'Connell and his followers, they were occupied for were then the quarters of the governor and the deputy governor of the prison, and that those areas are marked G on that plan. So it's that kind of central spine in the middle of between the two courtyards in the original Francis Johnson jail. Thomas Purton was the governor of Richmond Bridewell Penitentiary at the time, and he agreed to, at the request of the corporation, along with his deputy, to vacate his quarters, and he moved into rented accommodation, and he made his quarters then available as the deputy governor to O'Connell and the six other men, as well as their private gardens. We get a good sense of what the accommodation was like for the prisoners because T.M. Ray, who was, as I said, the secretary of the Repeal Association, he commissioned Henry O'Neill, who was a member of the Repeal movement, who was he had paid his dues, but he was also an artist and an antiquarian who's kind of specialized in buildings. He was invited in to create a series of watercolor sketches of the rooms and gardens occupied by O'Connell and his fellow prisoners, his fellow political prisoners. And you can see it's incredibly precise. He even gives the dimensions of the rooms that they occupied. So this is the governor's quarters. So again, what we are looking at now, we can see the very distinctive clock tower there. So that clock tower we're looking at the back of it. The front of it is facing out onto the South Circular Road, and we can see here the governor's quarters, which were occupied by the prisoners, by O'Connell and the six and his six followers. And as I said, they also took over the governor's garden as well, which was right next door. Now, part of the governor's garden would be occupied by the National Stadium, which is now used as a venue for kind of sporting events, mostly boxing and concerts and theatre. Um, Interestingly, they set up a little kind of pavilion, a tent essentially, where they could shelter on sunny days or on rainy days as well. Um, and they nicknamed it Mast. So this was the venue for one of their monster meetings. Similarly, in the deputy governor's garden, Deputy Governor Cooper's garden, there was a little mound which was used as kind of almost a viewing point. There's a beautiful view of the Dublin Mountains actually from the back of the prison, and they call that Tara Hill. Again, a reference back to um, the uh, the location of a monster meeting in 1843, the previous year. So again, I think this is really significant in terms of this idea of um, keeping the campaign in the public mind and the public imagination. So everyone who visits and is shown around, of course, they all come back and say they have this, they've nicknamed part of the prison Tara Hill after where they're the monster meeting. Similar, there's a Mulla mast in the prison. So what they're doing here, I think, is trying to keep the campaign going, keep it in the imagination of people at the time. Um, so as I said, this is the deputy governor's garden. And inside, they create a private Catholic chapel for O'Connell, and he attends mass in the chapel every day, and has prayers there every day, along with the other Catholic uh, prisoners. Some of the other traversers are actually Protestant or Church of Ireland. They seem to just go to the regular, the normal Protestant chapel within Richmond Bridewell, but a special chapel is set up for O'Connell, who becomes, increasingly pious and religious as he gets older. There's also a communal drawing room where presumably the prisoners could meet and read and play cards or just converse with one another. Though interestingly, Charles Gavin Duffy in his memoir said that during the day, mostly the prisoners kind of kept to their own rooms or kept to themselves. A lot of them had work to do. The newspaper editors were still involved in their newspapers. T.M. Ray was still involved in running the repeal movement. O'Connell was constantly writing letters and that kind of thing. So during the day, they, kept to themselves and then came together then in the evening. Um, this is the dining room, and they would sit down for dinner every evening, and they would have had their guests. A lot of the men had brought their wives and families in with them, and we'll be hearing in a little bit about O'Connell's family who were there with him. But also they would have had guests. So somebody said that it was pretty normal for up to 30 people to attend dinner in the prison every night. And people wanted, it was the place to be really in 1844 to visit O'Connell in prison. And you can see here O'Connell is wearing his repeal cap at the table, and apparently this is something he did for much of the rest of his life. He liked to wear this cap at the dinner table in particular. Um, this is O'Neill's painting of O'Connell's bedroom. You can see he's clearly brought in a lot of books with him, and there's a very distinctive upright desk. O'Connell apparently had a preference for upright desks. That's where he used to do a lot of his writing standing up. And then we have Gavin Duffy's sitting room and his bedroom. This is Dr. John Gray. As said, that he was the editor of the Freeman's Journal. So this is his sitting room, but also the place where he was, I suppose, continuing to contribute to the Freeman's Journal and continue his role as editor. That's his bedroom. What's remarkable about these paintings as well is they're a wonderful insight into what a typical kind of middle class domestic bedroom and a sitting room was like in Ireland in the 1840s. This is John O'Connell's bedroom. He was, as I said earlier, he was O'Connell's son, and in many ways his kind of political heir. And he seems to share his father's preference for an upright desk. And down in Derrynane, we actually have one of O'Connell's upright desks that he used when he was down in Kerry. This is Tom Steele's bedroom, and this is T.M. Ray's sitting room. So, as I said, he was behind a lot of the documentation of what happened in Richmond in 1844. And he's also behind a lot of the kind of propaganda activities as well. He seems to be behind a lot of the things to publicize um, uh, stories about O'Connell in prison. And again, they're using this as a way of highlighting, I suppose, the injustice that O'Connell and his movement are suffering at the time. You can see there TM Ray's children, it's definitely one of his, at least one of his daughters, there playing on the ground beside their father. And I said the men brought, they brought in their wives and they brought in their children, and of course they could, come and go as they pleased. And this is TM Ray's bedroom. TM Ray also, it would seem, is responsible for inviting in Alexander Toussaint Dubray, who had arrived in Ireland because he had secured the franchise for Ireland for a new process known as a daguerreotype, uh, invented by a Frenchman, Daguerre, in 1839. This is, I suppose, the earliest form of photography. Um, and Dubray had come to Dublin and set up a studio up at the Rotunda, actually kind of almost on the roof. It was a kind of a glass studio on the roof of what's now the Ambassador Theatre. And I suppose for Dubray, the attraction of coming into Richmond and setting up a temporary um, photographic studio there was the fact that this was great publicity for this kind of new, amazing technology. So these images are now in the National Gallery of Ireland. Interestingly, they came to the National Gallery via T.M. Ray's daughter, who I believe sold them for £5. There's a wonderful article about this whole story about both the daguerreotypes and the H.A. O'Neill watercolor sketches, which appeared in the Irish Arts Review a number of years ago, written by Anne Hodge and Peter Harbison, and that's well worth following up on. But here we see O'Connell. This is the only known surviving photographic image of Daniel O'Connell. So it's really a remarkable thing to see. I suppose we're so used to seeing him in engravings and paintings, but here is a photograph of him. You can see, by 1847, he's getting on in years. Interestingly, he's also wearing the famous Milesian cap, the repeal hat, is on his head, and I think somebody has gone in afterwards and gilded the shamrocks on the band of the hat. Here we see daguerreotypes of some of his fellow prisoners. So Gavin Duffy, the editor of The Nation, Richard Barrett, the editor of The Pilot, and Sir John Gray. Unfortunately, his daguerreotype does not survive. Um, but again, it's really interesting just to see these figures in photographic form from that period. Um, Sorry, before I leave that, again, it's also remarkable to think that um, the authorities arrest, even the thought now of arresting the editors of the three leading nationalist newspapers in the country again shows, I suppose, the repressive nature the of the administration in Ireland at the time. And then we have the three members of the repeal movement proper, John O'Connell's son, Thomas Steele, and Thomas Matthew Ray, who of course had arranged for Dubray to come in to take his daguerreotypes. And as I said, TM Ray seems to be something of a unofficial archivist. So he goes around and also he takes the soap dish and the toothbrush holder used by Daniel O'Connell. These are now in the collection in Derrynane. And similarly with these glasses, he used a pin and he inscribed at length that that this was the soap dish that the Liberator used during his imprisonment in Richmond. Bridewell in 1844, and similarly with the glasses used at dinners in the prison. What's I think really interesting in terms of the material culture of imprisonment is one of the reasons sometimes that you get so much material from political imprisonment is people are aware that they're in a historically important moment, but they also have time to reflect and to archive it, to uh, gather material, to preserve material. Um, and again, it's an amazing just how much material culture from this particular event or these months survive in collections, not just in the Derrynane collection, in the O'Connell family's own collection, but also the National Museum, National Gallery, and National Library. There's a more conventional, I suppose, old-fashioned portrait of O'Connell done by Nicholas Joseph Crowley. And you can see here this inscription that O'Connell wrote underneath. This is an engraving that's produced based on the drawing, and he signs it 6th of September. So this is when he's being released from prison. Um, Charles Gavin Duffy said that felt that this was quite a flattering portrait of O'Connell. He certainly looks a lot younger than he does in the daguerreotype. Um, Interestingly, Gavin Duffy says that this engraving of O'Connell done by Carrick are based on a painting by Carrick was much more reflective of what Daniel O'Connell looked like at the time, and this is definitely a man in his 60s. Um, Interestingly, though, while O'Connell, even his admirers would have said that he was could be quite vain, he picks this as the one that is sent out to his followers. Um, so you can see here that Daniel O'Connell sent copies of this portrait, the engravings of this portrait to all the Liberal mayors in Ireland, and there are letters as well, where he sends copies of this engraving out to friends and supporters. And again, in some ways, it feels very similar to what used to happen in the British Empire when the monarch's portrait was sent to every corner of the empire so people would see, I suppose, the face of the leader. And similarly, I think O'Connell is, again, he's putting himself and his movement in the public eye. Interestingly, if you look at his coat there, there's one button which is slightly different, and that's because this is a repeal button, and you can see here an example of some of these repeal buttons from Derrynane, with the crown, the harp crowned with two shamrocks either side. So again, within the portrait, he's alluding to the repeal movement, and I suppose his leadership of it. O'Connell, like a lot of the other men, was joined by members of his family. His one of two of his daughters came in to kind of keep house for him. So Ellen Fitzsimon, Nee O'Connell, she had married one of his supporters. She came in, as did his daughter Betsy, Betsy French, as she was at that stage. This is her um, back in about 1818 as a young girl. She's in the photograph actually or in the painting rather. She's painted alongside her brother John, who was himself uh, a prisoner with his father. Of course, a grown man at that stage, and his wife Elizabeth was also uh, in Richmond along with their children, and there's descriptions. O'Connell was very fond of his grandson, also Daniel. This is a scrapbook, a page from a scrapbook that Elizabeth O'Connell, his O'Connell's daughter-in-law, kept um, while she was in Richmond. And you can see here again in September, just before. This is I think it's written here, the last day of captivity. She gets O'Connell, but also the other traversers, Barrett and Gray and T.M. Ray and Duffy and Steele, to sign it as well. So this is just images of her scrapbook. A lot of it is kind of very kind of conventional scrapbooking activities, but there are then pages. There's one page given over to this very impressive engraving of O'Connell, of a kind of a bas relief of O'Connell. There's also a lovely image of Derrynane Bay and Derrynane House, or Derrynane Abbey, as it would have been at that time, O'Connell's ancestral home, amongst its pages as well. But many of the others are just nice things that she's seen in magazines and engravings that she's cut out to decorate the scrapbook. Um, O'Connell was visited regularly by his son Daniel. So again, we have Daniel not as an adult as he would have been in 1844, but as a baby on his mother's knee. This is a portrait of Mary O'Connell, who died in 1836. Daniel Jr. used to visit his father, and down in Derrynane, there's a prayer book that Daniel Sr. gave Daniel Jr., somewhat confusingly, on the day of Daniel Sr.'s birthday. But uh, Daniel Jr. Would go every Monday then to Conciliation Hall, which had been built as a meeting place for the repeal movement. And at the Monday meeting, he would kind of give a report on how his father and the other prisoners were doing. He would often read out letters or messages that his father sent to the repeal. So in some ways, he became very much kind of, I suppose, the spokesman for his father. As I mentioned, Mary O'Connell died in 1836, leaving Daniel quite bereft. But while he was in Richmond, he seems to become infatuated by a young woman, Rose MacDowell, a woman young enough not only to be his daughter, but actually his granddaughter. And again, Charles Gavin Duffy talks about this in his memoir written in the 1890s. And he says that O'Connell's family were quite alarmed by this, not just because Rose McDowell was so much younger than Daniel, but also the fact that although her father was a supporter of the repeal movement, they were Presbyterians, and again, that would have been considered a big problem at the time, particularly given O'Connell's position at the time. He was seen very much as, I suppose, as a leader for Irish Catholics. Um, Rose McDowell, it would seem, was not interested in the attentions of Daniel, and I'd say much to, as Gavin Duffy said, much to the family's relief, kind of removed herself from the situation and kind of distanced herself. But what's interesting is that this story, makes it out into the press at the time. Again, I suppose part of the idea was that our part of the issue is again the fact that O'Connell is confined in Richmond, Bridewell, and the eyes not just of Ireland but of the world. This is a huge international story. Are focused in on Richmond, Bridewell, which again is what the movement wants. But it also means that when something like this happens as well, it's harder, I suppose, to disguise it or maybe cover it up a little bit. So as I said, the newspaper seemed very much aware of what is happening. Gavin Duffy also talks about John O'Connell. He says that O'Connell, within, I suppose, the life of the of the prison amongst these kind of privileged political prisoners. He said he was indefatigable as a master of revels, projected private theatricals, and got Julius Caesar into a rehearsal. No Cassius being forthcoming among the convicted conspirators, he brought from the outer world beyond the walls his cousin, Morris Lane, to undertake the part. And when I was reading that, I was wondering, for Duffy, did he have a sense that there was something of a premonition here? Because, of course, in the years that followed, Duffy, William Smith O'Brien, Thomas Francis Meagher, and the members of Young Ireland would, I suppose, turn against O'Connell, uh, much as Brutus and Cassius turn against Julius Caesar, because they feel he has become too arrogant in his role. Um, and in many ways, Gavin Duffy. Or William Smith O'Brien certainly kind of almost play the role of Cassius in terms of turning on O'Connell in the years to come. So it's kind of an interesting choice of play in hindsight. Um, but as well as family members who were living in the prison, the prisoners received a huge number of visitors. And again, there's so many visitors that they have to publish in the press kind of rules for visitors about the days on which visitors can be accepted. So they say that on a Monday or Wednesday there are no visitors allowed. If people want to visit, gentlemen want to visit, they have to submit their visiting cards in advance. Again, rules about like, on Sundays there's nobody to be admitted until after 2 in the afternoon. Because as I said, there's huge interest. And again, this is interest in many cases. I think there was a kind of huge curiosity about the idea of in many ways, the most famous person in Ireland being placed in prison and what that might be like. But also the movement is trying to create these stories and create this focus and to keep the world's focus and certainly the focus of Irish people on O'Connell and his plight along with the six other men. This is I suppose, an example. This is a glove worn by A.M. Bentley when she visited O'Connell in the prison on the 10th of July in 1844. One of the most remarkable stories associated with people trying to visit O'Connell related to a group of teenage boys from Blennerville in County Kerry in O'Connell's native county. Uh, the two Blennerhassett brothers, Roland and Arenberg, they borrow without permission their father's boat, the Colleen Das, and along with some other teenagers, William Collis, young Reardon, and somebody who's just referred to in reports as the juvenile helmsman. They sail and row the Colleen Das on the 29th of June 1844. They sneak from their beds and get down to the boat, and then they sail from Blennerville out into the Atlantic. They go around Kerry Head, back up the Shannon Estuary, so just up by between Clare and Limerick. And when they get to Limerick City, it's at that point they decide that they'll send a message home to their families to tell them what they're up to, because they are on their way to visit Daniel O'Connell in Dublin. So they sail and row up the Shannon through Lough Derg, up beyond Banagher to Shannon Harbour. Then they join the Grand Canal and go across the Midlands. And then in early July, they end uh, uh, up presumably just at the back of Richmond Bridewell on the Grand Canal. And they are welcomed and feted in the prison, and they're invited to dinner, and they become, I suppose, minor celebrities at the time. And then I suppose when they have they're when they meet the great man, then they decide then to return back home the way they came. But again, I suppose it shows the degree to which the story captured the public imagination at the time. It's really in 1844 in Ireland. During these months, it's all anyone seems to be talking about. Um, More, I suppose, politically strategic meetings or visits take place in on the 13th of June, 1844. You can see this report here from the Dublin Weekly Mail. And essentially, the Lord Mayors of every major city and town, certainly outside of Ulster, turn up to visit O'Connell. So you can see people from all over the country, from the Mayor of Cork, the Mayor of Limerick, Clonmel. You can see there of Ennis as well. We have William Smith O'Brien, the MP. He visits. Uh, O'Loughlin, Reverend Father Hennessy, Richard Scott, Charles O'Connell, and Cornelius Hickey, Esquire from Ennis, a deputation of the great and the good, visit him from County Clare. And again, uh, what I think they're trying to do to highlight as well is the fact that here's this man who uh, is visited by the leaders of Irish society, and yet he's in prison. It in many ways it kind of subverts the whole idea of prison, which is designed, I suppose, as a place of punishment and as a place of humiliation. And what O'Connell and his movement do is they almost make it ridiculous. So they're placed in prison and they're being visited by Lord Mayors. Uh, Similarly, outside the prison as well, there are meetings being held. So this is a meeting of St. Patrick's Ward, which takes place in Pleasant Street in Mr. O'Neill's spacious field, which is just a few streets away from Richmond Bridewell. But there were meetings all over the country as well. And again, this is all about uh, demonstrating support for O'Connell, demonstrating the support and the power of his movement as well, and the sense of injustice that people feel about what has happened to him. Um, the repealers of the Linen Hall ward on the north side of the city, they actually present O'Connell with this beautiful carved wooden loo table, which was made from a single piece of oak, apparently. And you can see um, on the legs, you can see the you've got the faithful Irish wolfhounds, again alluding to O'Connell's, I suppose his lineage as the O'Connell of Derrynane. The feet are they're the hooves of deer, again not only the prey of aristocratic Irish chieftains, but also an allusion to the fact that um, the O'Connell crest features a deer. And you can see in the background then the central pillar is actually based on an Irish round tower. Even more provocative, I would say, is this chair, which was presented to O'Connell for his 69th birthday on the 6th of August, 1844, when he's a prisoner in Richmond. So, again, we earlier were saying, is it a crown or is it a cap here? Is it a throne or is it a chair? And on it, again, here is the ceremonial cap, maybe crown, maybe cap. Again, playing with all this kind of symbolism. And again, the idea of like setting this very grand chair into someone who, you know, uh, on the face of it is a prisoner. It's a very kind of grand throne for a prisoner. And in many ways, all this uh, kind of almost over the top reaction or all these kind of gifts as well is part of the message that the movement is trying to show, which is that the government administration in Ireland, they can place O'Connell in prison, but they can't punish him because they effectively they don't control the prisons anymore, but also the people won't allow it. So maybe they have to put up with the fact that he accept that he's being placed in prison. Uh, but they will not accept that he is in any way discomforted or experiences any deprivation while a prisoner. This is another gift, a crucifix made from Wicklow gold, given by the Reverend John Spratt on behalf of the Christian Doctrine Confraternity. And then W.J. O'Neill Daunt, in his memoir of this period, he said that the convicted patriots received numerous presents of fruit and flowers. A patriotic confectioner presented them with two monster cakes. Mr. Scriber of Westmoreland Street sent them seven musical boxes to cheer their imprisonment, and it is said immediately on the arrival of the harmonious cargo, the prisoners evinced their satisfaction with more musical zeal than taste, namely by setting the seven boxes all playing together. And again, like these kind of gifts and these presentations were a way of people showing their support, and again, subverting the whole idea of imprisonment. You send in all these like lovely food and lovely presents because what you're saying is, he's placed in prison, but that's all you can do. Um, Again, it's I suppose, O'Connell's supporters showing almost the powerlessness in some ways of the administration. They can imprison him, but that's about it. O'Connell is eventually released. Word arrives on the 5th of September, so the news travels across, is brought across from London to Holyhead, across then, and then apparently there's a race to be the first person to get from Kingstown, now Dún Laoghaire, with the news to Richmond, Bridewell. So the news is brought that he is to be released, and the next day, the 6th of September, there's essentially a garden party in the governor and deputy governor's garden, where lots of people are welcomed in to celebrate the fact that O'Connell and his followers are to be released. You can see here, this is a drinking glass, and inscribed on it by T.M. Ray is the fact that this is a drinking glass used at the last meal that the prisoners have together on the 6th of September. But O'Connell decides then on the 6th of September, then they are free to leave. So O'Connell walks from Richmond, surrounded by crowds and crowds of supporters, and he walks from Richmond, Bridewell on South Circular Road, just down to Merrion Square. And then when he gets to Merrion Square, to his Dublin home, he goes out onto the balcony, and as he does a number of times during his career, he addresses his followers from the balcony. And again, you can see this particular image was collected by T.M. Ray and is now in the National Library of Ireland. So again, Ray is kind of snipping away and creating a scrapbook of important images from this period in O'Connell's life. He returns the next day for his official release, and while he's been in prison, his followers have been working away on producing this chariot or car or carriage, now part of the National Collection, part of the collection of the National Museum of Ireland, but on display down in Derrynane. And this ceremonial carriage is how he will leave Derrynane, or sorry, how he will leave Richmond Bridewell, rather, on the Saturday. So news comes on the Thursday. Uh, on Friday they have the garden party, and then on the Saturday he actually returns back to Richmond, Bridewell, um, for a massive Thanksgiving inside in his prison chapel, and that he emerges out and gets up onto this chariot alongside his chaplain and John O'Connell, his son. He's also joined by several of his grandchildren who are dressed in green satin outfits with green satin bonnets with white feathers in it. Um, and he's in the first carriage, his ceremonial chariot, and then he's followed by carriages containing the other prisoners. and then they begin on this kind of ceremonial procession around Dublin. Um, Loads and loads of his supporters come out to support him and to cheer him on and line the streets as he heads down the South Circular Road, actually down towards Kilmainham and then around up along the Quays. He his procession, they passed the forecourts where he'd been sentenced, but then it climaxes in College Green outside the former Irish Parliament House, which O'Connell wants to have restored and to be once again a Parliament for Ireland. And you can see him here pointing to it. And here you can see, and again, another image of him pointing symbolically towards the Parliament that he wants to have restored. And at the front of the carriage there as well, you can see a harpist who sat on the cart the whole way through on the carriage, playing the harp as they went along. So, kind of layers and layers of symbolism. So in many ways, this is a day of huge triumph, the 7th of September. This, O'Connell is there in all his pomp and ceremony. And in many ways, I suppose this carriage to us now, it seems almost kind of slightly ridiculous. But I suppose it's important to remember that what O'Connell and his movement are trying to do here is also to counter the pomp and ceremony of imperial government in Ireland. So I suppose the British Empire becomes a master at the use of ceremony, of pomp and ceremony, military marching bands. It seems like this very kind of part of their power comes from their ability to do all this pomp and ceremony. And I think what O'Connell and his movement are trying to do with this ceremonial parade through the city, but also I think the whole time in terms of the monster meetings and all these demonstrations is to show that they are that Irish people are also capable of this kind of symbolism and this kind of impressive displays of ceremony and propaganda. And as I said, this day is really, I suppose, a great triumph for O'Connell. However, I suppose it's also, uh, in many ways, the last great triumph of his political career. Um, in the years that follow, so this is, he's released in 1844. 1845 is when use Ireland starts to see the first signs of the famine that is going to devastate the country, resulting in the deaths of over 1 million people and the emigration of 1 million or more. Um, and particularly hard hit is West Kerry, the Iveragh Peninsula, where O'Connell is from, where his, as I said, where his country home is, where his estate is. And unfortunately for O'Connell, the coming of the famine also coincide with his increasingly failing health. There's a very uh, heartbreaking description of when O'Connell goes to Westminster, and as I said at this stage, his health has really broken. He goes to plead for help for his people, and for years he has been the great orator, the one who can really command Parliament and any meeting with his voice and his gifts as a public speaker, and he's so weak that he can barely be heard. Um, and eventually, I suppose knowing that he doesn't have long left, he decides to go on a pilgrimage to Rome. So this is an image of him at Lyon in France on his way to Rome on pilgrimage. However, he never makes Rome when he gets to Genoa. He falls very, very seriously ill, and it is in Genoa that he dies in May of 1847. This is a monument to him in Genoa in the former hotel where he died. And then very famously, he said, his body to his heart to Rome and his body to Ireland. So his heart was sent to be interred in Rome, and his body then was returned to Ireland. And again, there's a kind of very rich kind of visual record of the return of his body across Europe. This is the tent, the sea chapel that's set up on board the ship that brings him back to Dublin. And again, in a very kind of poignant echo of that great day of triumph in 1845, this is his funeral procession, which featured the empty carriage. This is it passing his home in Merrion Square. And of course, I suppose most poignant of all, this is it in College Green, where he had in great triumph with all his supporters around him in 1845, pointed to the Irish Parliament, and I suppose made his vow to have it restored, something ultimately he never manages to do. However, one of the things I would argue was in terms of the significance of this event is, I think, with the imprisonment of O'Connell and his followers in 1844, you see, I suppose, the creating of a template for how Irish political movements will weaponize imprisonment um, throughout the 19th and into the 20th century. So just 4 years after O'Connell was imprisoned in Richmond Bridewell, his former followers who break away from him and form the Young Ireland movement. They have their rebellion, and this is actually again in an interesting echo of Dubray. This is a photograph taken in either Clonmel or Kilmainham Gaol in 1848 of Thomas Francis Marr and William Smith O'Brien. O'Brien is seated. Um, uh, Marr is between him and the soldier. And they are actually they're in a number of prisons, including Richmond. And this is an autograph signed by Marr and O'Brien in May of 1849. Sorry, 18, sorry, yeah, 1849. This is also uh, a book of plays, the plays of Shakespeare, which William Smith O'Brien, Thomas Francis Meagher sign in 1848 in Kilmainham Jail. There's also Charles Gavin Duffy. He went with the Young Irelanders and he signed it in Newgate Prison in 1848, as did Kevin Izzard O'Doherty. But again, there's really interesting echoes of what happens in Richmond 4 years before. And again, in the Illustrated London News, in a report from the 16th of September 1848, they do a report on Kilmainham and they talk about the fact that crowds had been coming out um, previously in the August when William Smith O'Brien is there, and they stare up at the window. Apparently, O'Brien, according to the newspaper, he's held in kind of the central block, the central administrative block on the top floor, and these the public go out just to stare up at the room in which at the window of his rooms in the prison. Um, and again, it shows, I think, how imprisonment becomes such a feature of the story of Irish politics, uh, both revolutionary and constitutional, in the years that follow. Whether it's Parnell and his followers in the 1880s and the plan of campaign, but then people like Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa, and again into the 20th century. We have the use of imprisonment as a source of propaganda. You can see here the very famous poster during the 1918 election. This is one for Griffith, who was in prison, and the election of men who are in prison, men and women who are in prison. In 1918, imprisonment really becomes part of the culture, I think, of Irish revolution at the time, through into the War of Independence, Civil War, and then later, you can see again echoes of it during the Troubles in the North in the 1970s and 80s. So again, I think one of the legacies of O'Connell's imprisonment is, how central the prison becomes to Irish political and revolutionary traditions in the years that follow. So that's it from me. So I hope this is of interest. And again, thank you to Clare Libraries for inviting me to contribute to your history festival. It's a great honor to share this remarkable story. Thank you.